Sorry about that. Said have a little bit of fun, right? Hot rod building and biohacking. What do they have in common? Besides almost everything. Except hot rod building, there's an inanimate object that's not breathing and talking to you and doesn't have a heartbeat, and it's one of those things that you can walk away from it for a week or two. Or setting up this shot was interesting. Still not exactly happy with it. Let's see what we got here. Nope, don't like it. So one of my followers on the back end had messaged me and said, yeah, it's a good analogy, hot rod building. And Dad, Dad did 3 major projects. The very first project he did was a 48 Ford pickup truck. And he did that 100% original, with the exception of tires, rims, and steering wheel. And I'll never forget, it was the day of the show, and in the hot rod world, it's the world of wheels. I mean, that's the caveat, right? That's the classic when it comes to competition. And it was the day of the show. It was just done. I mean, like literally the paint was drying in the bed. It was on the trailer. My stepmom, she was buffing it out and drying on the way down to the show, and he pulled first place in that, and then he was hooked. And this is the second one that he did. This is a 36 Ford Coupe, and this is a calendar that it made, the 1987 Street Rod calendar, and he pulled several trophies off of that car. And he did go on to do a 33, which is the traditional ZZ Top car. And so if you've ever known or ever attempted to build a hot rod, and that's a really small knit community, right? So, and this is back in the day before the internet. So you were reliant upon catalogs and people, right? Networks, and that whole community to source and get done various projects. And what Dad couldn't do obviously he couldn't machine an engine. Ironically, that actually has a Chevy engine in it. But you wind up with this community of people, and biohackers are the exact same way. You wind up with a community of people that, hot rod builders bring home buckets of rust. Biohackers land on the floor. I mean, if you're lucky enough to trip into biohacking and you're born into that environment, I've talked about that previously. Hey, kudos to you. And somebody had posted a question in one of the adrenal fatigue groups. Will we ever get back to where we were? And it's like, will that car ever look like it did the day it rolled off the assembly line? Yeah, probably not. Ever. I mean, it's better. It's different. But it's not ever going to be the exact same as it did the day it rolled off the assembly line. Our physiology, because so many of us land in the biohacking rabbit hole, if you're watching this YouTube video, either A, you're related to me, and if you're my kid or one of my stepdaughters or a grandchild or a descendant thereof, I mean, who knows how long YouTube will be around, we wind up in this rabbit hole after having neglected and mismanaged our own physiology to a place where, depending on where you start your journey and the deficit thereof will be to the extremes of restoration that you have to go through, right? If Dad had not found this in a field in Arkansas and found it in an old lady's garage, he still would have torn it all the way down to here. This is where hot rod builders take it. They take it all the way down to the frame. they sandblast it and get all the rust off and la 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 la. And biohackers, we take it all the way down to the frame. And biohackers, it's not just physiology. See, that's where health restoration versus biohacking comes into play. Because biohacking, there's not a single biohacker on the planet that is not talking about their mental, emotional, spiritual, physiological health combined. Because we don't see it different. We don't see a disconnect between, and that's where my favorite word comes in, psychoneuroendocrinology. We don't see a disconnect between our physical health and our emotional state and our mental state. There is no disconnect. And our spiritual, or whatever spiritual journey we happen to be on. So, it's probably not ever going to look like it did the day it rolled out of the assembly line. I don't know. I know what my story is. If you're watching this video, I encourage you to get to know your own story in a different way. And what I mean by that is to say, get a hold of your mom, if she's still alive, and find out what you were like in the first 2 years of life. What did she go through during her pregnancy? What kind of child were you? What circumstances were you born under? Was there trauma? Or, were you born into a Picasso painting or a Norman Rockwell painting? That's one of my favorite analogies. Everybody's striving for the Norman Rockwell. That's what we have in our head, when in reality we're living a Picasso. It's wonky and all over the place. So, depending on who you are and what your story is. Now, I'm very familiar with my story. Very familiar. Because of my years in recovery and because of my years in therapy. So that part of this equation wasn't really hard for me to tap into, right? I knew my prenatal environment. I knew that my mother was, she was a gorgeous bartender who was a drunk hot mess. And I was the third. I was the baby of, I have an older brother and an older sister, and they're half to each other. We all have different dads. And I have a half sister in Texas from my father. So I know my story, and as a baby, I know I was a dry birth. My mother went into labor, and 1965, she went into labor, water broke, went into labor, went to the hospital. All of a sudden, nothing. No labor pains, no heartbeat, because that was before sonogram, talked about that before. And I was a dry birth. So my microbiome, once you get into understanding where your microbiome comes from and the whole, how you get that at birthing, were you a C-section? Or were you born vaginally? That makes a big difference as to what sets up for your immune system, and it gets complicated. And then your individual personality traits, right? So as a child, my nickname was Sloopy, after the song that came out in '64, I believe, Sloopy Hang On. And my sister's nickname was Screamin' Mimi. Sometimes she's still Screamin' Mimi. And sometimes I'm still Sloopy. It's like, I was very independent. I was a really easy child. But I was also born with no fear, right? That was a defect. So, and nobody picked up on the fact that was a defect. So, depending on who you are and what your story is, your health restoration and your biohacking journey is going to be as unique as you are. And thank God we're not all the same, right? One of me is enough. In my own head, I don't need any more of me. Thanks. But hot rod building is fun, right? mean, you spend a year and a half, 2 years, and I mean, it was painful. My dad was a general contractor. He's a residential developer. He's one of those guys that, you drive down through a neighborhood and they're putting up 300 homes in a subdivision. He was, to my knowledge, the very first person on record ever to take a house from ground breaking, the day that the backhoe went, house was sold, plan was, the consumer had chosen a floor plan, and the day the backhoe hit the ground, to final walkthrough complete, 30 calendar days. To my knowledge, he's the first one that did that ever, in the Southwest anyway. He also, and he was one of those guys that he was all in. And it used to be here in Arizona that houses went up on a 4-inch slab. And that worked right up until he had a subdivision sink. And we started building 2-story houses. And so, up, it's an area called Sabino Canyon. And all of a sudden houses started shifting and sinking, and they never could figure out exactly why, geologically, why it was. Clearly it had to do with the water tables and whatnot. But he would have to go in, saw the house away from the slab, jack the whole house up on hydraulic jacks, jackhammer the slab out, redo the slab, the plumbing and the slab, and then lower the house. It was a hot mess. And that's when he started doing 6-inch slabs on a single story and 12-inch slabs on a 2-story. And he added free rebar and the tension torsion system. And he's been written up all over the place for engineering. But that's really the same attitude with hot rod building, is you stripping it down and let's get it right. And a biohacker's like, let's strip this puppy down. So depending on where your story starts is indicative of where your story's going to take you. And the real hack to all of that is to enjoy the ride, right? Enjoy the ride. I recently so we need to talk about your Achilles tendon. We had a major relapse. Junk food, smokes, and all. I'm like, oh crap, you gotta be kidding me. What the hell just happened here? So what happened was, this is where the project manager in me is really advantageous. So my dog, I'm a cannabis card holder, and my dog, or actually it's my granddaughter's dog, Molly, she got into my cannabis. I didn't know it. And on noon on one day last week, we were eating scrambled eggs and steak. We're out barbecuing, and the next thing, about 4 o'clock, my brother-in-law comes in and he says, Molly, there's something wrong with Molly. She's not okay. She's like wobbling around and she's peeing on herself. And I'm like, oh God, she's been poisoned. And we just a year ago had 3 of our dogs poisoned. 2 of them died. And about 5 o'clock in the evening, and we're bolting to 24-hour bed. And my daughter meets us there with my 2 granddaughters, my oldest granddaughter, and just this high intensity, high emotion. And I was outside of my eating window, and the next thing and my daughter's still a smoker, and next thing you know, I'm in the junk food and I'm eating, I'm smoking. I'm like, oh God, I totally screwed that up because I didn't have a go pack. I wasn't prepared. I wasn't prepared for an emergency to be able to have food to go. I mean, 5 o'clock, noon to 6 is my eating window. And I didn't have a fallback plan as to, in case of an emergency, I didn't have a bag of beef jerky or pork rinds or something. And so, but you will have an Achilles tendon. Yeah, you will. And whether it's you're dealing with carb addiction or you're dealing with, a wonky sitting on, I've got some shifting going on. That's all good, right? It's all amazing good stuff. But things get wonky even when you hit the lottery, right? I mean, in Alcoholics Anonymous, they tell you you are as much of a risk for a relapse on good news as you are bad. And the better the news, the higher, and I'm like, it just spun. And I'll talk about it publicly someday. It's not appropriate right at the moment, but some really good stuff shifting in my world. Stuff that, and I talk about it. The Norman Rockwell painting versus the Picasso. It's like, get comfy and love on the Picasso because, newsflash, you are generic. Everybody else on the planet is also living a Picasso. Very few people on this planet can claim a Norman Rockwell painting. We all have it in our head. We all have, that vision of, family and, perfection, and like, no, that's not what it really looks like. And I'm the renegade, right? I'm the maverick in my orbit. I'm the one going, no, we not be calling a spade. We're going to call this spade a spade. We are not calling a pretty shovel in Graham's little garden, right? We're calling this what it is, and we're going to break these cycles. And so a lot of really good stuff. And all of a sudden, I'm back to, yesterday morning, I could not get myself settled down. I even drank coffee. I'm like, what the hell? And I'm on the phone with, I have a psychiatrist. Her name's Dr. Rose. And guys, pull for me because I'm really praying. She's a third-year student and medical in her residency. And I'm praying she comes part of our channel when she graduates instead of, God, wouldn't that be amazing? And she's like, we revert back to what we've previously known, right? And it's kind of like, and there's a lot of nuances, just like with cholesterol. There's a lot of nuances to that picture, but there's a lot of nuance to this journey. And where do you want to go? There's a price of admission for excellence. And there's a lot of people that, nope, I'm good right over here. I'm good hanging out in the bleachers. Nope, don't really want to get in the race car. We just want to look, right? We don't want to be the driver. We don't want to be the car owner. We just want to watch the race. And so I want to encourage everybody to get to know your own story, right? That's a really good place to start. And then ask yourself, well, where do I want to go? You can restore yourself to a place where you're functioning just fine. Does that mean that you are out there doing all the... Not necessarily. You may not have that desire to do that. I have a tendency to put labels on it like mediocre. I don't know that that's appropriate either. I sometimes struggle with adjectives to describe things. Where do you want to go? What kind of car do you want to build? What kind of life do you want to create? I'm all in. There's two lives that you live. There's the one before you realize and Dan Bongino was talking about this yesterday. Mortality. We are all on a clock. We don't know when. We don't know under what circumstances. But when cancer comes falling out of your doctor's mouth, that clock becomes way more real, right? For now, for the moment, I was clear in February, got a nodule going on in my lung, not sure what it is, won't know for a while, and I am all in, 1,000%, all in, on excellence, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, all in. Fat lady is singing a really good tune right up off this planet. And there's lot of people are out there that are not that like-minded. They're like, no, I'm good. It's like, okay. It just makes us different. That's all. So, my psychiatrist, Dr. Rose, her name's Dr. Rose, my psychiatrist, she says, you need to come up with something catchy for your YouTube channel. You're going to have to rename that. So, what do you think about this? Sunny Stiver's Biohacking Reset Show, where we don't address just your physiology. We talk about everything in the kitchen sink. Your physical health, your biological, your spiritual, your mental, your emotional health. What do you think about that one? Sunny Stiver's Biohacking Reset Show. Crack myself up. So guys, YouTube saved my life, can save yours too. Get on it. Till next time, stay legendary. We love you.